slides. Okay. Anyway, we'll see. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's IRES seminar. Although we changed room, we're still gathered on the unceded, ancestral, and traditional territory of the Musqueam. Specifically, I was looking up the Hankaminam names. We're at the corner of Main Mall, which also bears the Hankaminam name Shu'aya, which means middle, and University Boulevard, which also bears the name Shu'yatastam, which means place for traditional instruction. These names do not denote traditional sites. They were given after the geography of the UBC campus came about, but along with other names that you can see on street signs around there, they contribute to conveying how geographies are perceived in Musqueam culture and how language is interconnected with the geographical organization of the land and the uses of the land. There's also a separate map that I was just looking at called the Musqueam Place Names Map. And that one highlights some traditional sites. I was quite fascinated by how all of these sites are connected to the water. But more generally, it reminded me how striking I find, like all of the, I'm quite fascinated by how all of the information that is shared about Musqueam culture, language, traditions, how easy it is to learn about this, which then begets the question of how we use this, whether it impacts the way we interact with the land, the way we do our work on this land. And that's where it gets slightly awkward because the land acknowledgements usually stop there and do not address this question. But anyway, I'm very excited today to welcome our speaker, Dr. Liv Yoon. She's an assistant professor at UBC in the School of Kinesiology, which is part of the Faculty of Education. She is working at the intersection of climate change, health, and social inequities. She received her PhD from UBC in kinesiology as well. And she then did a postdoctoral fellowship at Columbia University between the Earth Institute and the Mailman School of Public Health before coming back here. We're all very excited to hear about your work. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Yoon. I have no idea if that works. I have no idea if that actually works. I guess we'll find out afterwards.
Thank you, Josephine. All right. Thank you all for being here. Nice, really. Thank you. Familiar faces, new faces. This is very nice. So I have been told to stay behind the desk. So I actually have been trying to use or be more fluid in my movement when I teach or talk. But so I'm going to be staying put here. But this works also because I've been a little all over the place and I forgot my belt this morning. So this way you don't have to look at me like pulling up my pants the whole time. So you can, I mean, this is kind of going to be kind of the tone of the talk. It's going to be, I think, a little different than what you're used to. So Josephine and another, I think Dr. Chang, both of you invited me for this talk last year as well. And I politely, respectfully declined last year because from what I was used to, these talks were given by a lot more senior profs, a lot more established figures. And I had just started in January. I still very much feel like a baby prof. I'm like just lifting my head, you know. But this year I do have some findings to present from one of my ongoing projects. That said, I am also going to, I think, focus a little more on like the methodological approach and orientation, and talk also like situate my work more in the paradigm that I work in. And also explain how kinesiology and climate change connect, because I'm sure this is new to many of you, as it was to me too. I will also say IRES is, I've always been an admirer of IRES, even as a student here. I actually have been subscribed to this list for a while. I've come to these talks. I've taken IRES courses. Dr. Boyd, you are my external UBC examiner, actually. So great to see you. And I have, yeah, friends and colleagues here. So yeah, I feel really lucky to be here. So thank you. All right. And also I will say, Samantha, Sam, there you go. Communications administration coordinator for IRES here is actually a master's student who's working with me. So yeah, many connections here. Okay. That's okay. Yes. Does that work? Okay, cool. All right. So following Josephine, I'll say that the research activities that are portrayed here took place on the lands, traditional ancestral unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Stolo, Cayuse, Coquitlam, Umatilla, and Walla Walla nations. So what is on deck today for today? So I kind of have this in two different parts. So part one, I'm gonna first give you more of a background context to why I do what I do, situate my work yeah, I'm going to first situate and contextualize my work to make the rest of it make more sense. Not because I want to talk about myself, but I think this will just make the whole presentation make a lot more sense. And then secondly, I will give some preliminary findings from an example project that hopefully encapsulates and portrays the interdisciplinary nature of the work that I'm trying to pursue. All right. So kinesiology and climate change. I know that some of you here are in kinesiology, and maybe you have asked this question, maybe you have different answers to this question as well, but here is my take at least. So when you hear kinesiology, you might think of photos like this. These are actually from UBC Kinesiology, and this is all wonderful work that is going on here. So, you know, physiology, biomechanics, exercise, the regiments, like everything really. It means the art and science of human movement. The art part really gets overlooked, but there are sociocultural folks in kinesiology who understand bodies differently. So I will go back to my undergrad. So my undergrad was also in physical and health education. And to be honest, I don't remember that much like course content from my undergrad, but I think what I did a lot of was like reading the room. So, you know, I would enter these spaces and, you know, we're being told that, especially in kinesiology classes, that all of our bodies are the same. We are all made of the same bones and muscles, nerve systems, whatever. But we all know our bodies are read differently in different rooms, also in different contexts. You know, we experience the world differently based on what we look like, our ancestral history, the like many different identity axes that make up who we are. Also, the world sees and experiences all of our bodies differently. So I think that's the kind of thing that really intrigued me right from my undergrad, which led me to pursue work in sociocultural kinesiology. So, and it's not just me who does this in kin, there are other folks as well. And we think about bodies in context. So that means bodies in social context, cultural context, political context, historical context. And that combined with my interest in the environment, climate change, led to thinking about why some bodies are considered, you know, less valuable than others and therefore render to higher environment and climate related risks. So that is my way into doing climate work. So really my approach, my gateway into thinking about climate, doing this work is injustice, inequities, indignation, anger. I used to kind of shy away from talking about this because it felt like I had a hidden agenda. I mean, I guess all of us kind of have an agenda in all the work that we do. But now I explicitly label it because I think, you know, thanks to scholars and writers like Naomi Klein who have said emotions and affect can be leveraged towards your work. I think it's totally okay and could be really useful that inequities and injustice and indignation and anger can motivate someone's work. So that is the background, and that's why you'll see a real big focus on inequities and injustice and what I'm going to talk about. Okay. So that said, in the title of my talk, I said biopolitics of climate injustice. So if there are other sociologists or social scientists in general in this room, you'll associate the word biopolitics with scholars like Michel Foucault, Pierre Bourdieu. That is absolutely relevant here. I am using the term a little differently. So I'm using it generally to refer to how bodies are the sites where injustices manifest. Our bodies are the vehicles through which injustices are felt. You know, it is viscerally felt, whether it is a health issue or whether it is an act of indignity that you face, a comment hurled at you, it is your body that you experience that with. So that's what I mean by biopolitics of injustice, whether it's just you know, general injustice or climate injustice. So, right, so it's, why is this relevant here? Well, all of us, of course, experience these things, but the truth is it is not evenly distributed, especially when it comes to climate change. We know that burdens are very much disproportionately distributed, and that's unfair. And that there again is the indignation and anger piece. All right, so you'll see that I'll just talk about one piece of other work before I dive into the bigger project that I'm working on. But there's a real focus on populations facing injustices, and I will continue to use that term, even though it's a mouthful, rather than saying vulnerable populations, because I think framing, saying vulnerable populations kind of puts the onus on them as if it is their own shortcoming and such. So I will use the terms populations marginalized or populations facing injustices. All right. So then why do I focus on heat and indoor environmental quality and housing among other factors? So, when we think of the climate crisis, there's so much to focus on. So why am I focusing on this sliver? I think heat and indoor environmental quality are sites where multiple issues, multiple forms of inequities converge and compound each other. And indoor environments, so your housing environments, are sites where inequities really manifest and is really visible. So think about whether you have an air conditioner or not, or whether you might have an air conditioner, but you might not even be able to control it because you're a tenant and your landlord controls it. So these are acute sites where these forms of inequities and injustice really come into play. And also, of course, we can't forget about the 2021 heat dome. As I'm sure many of you were here already, 98% of deaths occurred indoors. That is a staggering number. 67% of people were seniors living alone also. So that's where all the social deprivation comes in. And we also know that obviously, people who are alone, there are multiple reasons why someone might be alone in their senior age, but this also means that people, they probably don't have the resources to go out and make connections, or have led a life that have led to a situation where they are alone near the end. And people facing social marginalization and physiological risk factors, so things like cardiovascular diseases, respiratory diseases. So those are physiologically vulnerable populations who are absolutely high at risk. So with that background, this is one other example of the work that I am pursuing, actually with a couple students here in the room. And part of the staggering stats here, one of them was that people with schizophrenia died at 1,500% of their representation rate. So they make up 1% of the BC population and the Canadian population, but they made up about 15.7% of all the deaths from the heat dome. So there's something going on here, and there's some biomedical research about why that might be. But we also know that people with schizophrenia are more likely to be unemployed, definitely more likely to be socially isolated. All the material and social deprivation factors that we knew and we continually find out are really high risk factors. So given the lack of qualitative research into this, our team, we've been pursuing interviews with people with schizophrenia about what their lives were like during the heat dome or just other heat waves, because there are some real challenges here where recall is a real symptom of schizophrenia. So, we've been generally talking about heat, and it's been really helpful. And yeah, we're going to try and pursue different directions from this work as well. But so that's just, I just have one slide here on this because I just wanted to say this is another example of how thinking about bodies in context has manifested into a project. So thinking about people with schizophrenia, not in just the biomedical context, but thinking about them in the broader social context where mental illness, there's stigma. They might be, one of the things that we found is that they hesitate from accessing public cooling resources because they face real stigma when they enter a setting, and they would rather avoid that. Or, the voices in their heads might be exaggerated when they're around people. So all of these things come into play and put them at higher risk. So that's just one other example. How much time do I have left? 15 minutes? Great. Okay. Perfect timing. So I'll now dive into the main project that is in the title of the talk. So I will deliver on what I promised. So this is the indoor environmental quality and health in subsidized housing. All right. So this work I have been pursuing in partnership with Health Canada and BC Housing. A little more background. I mean, just as you saw, so this is a screenshot from the BC Coroner's report after the 2021 heat dome. Why we decided to do this study is because, again, 98% of deaths occurred indoors. All the things that I just pointed out, people who died were mostly older and living alone from socially and materially deprived neighborhoods, which also means, less green neighborhoods. And most of them did not have air conditioners or other, thermal comfort appliances. So, what all of that says is, it's not just temperatures and humidity that killed people, it's all of these other factors together that have killed people. So what are the pillars of this study? Again, biopolitics of climate injustice is what's orienting this work. And it's, I mean, especially in Vancouver, but everywhere really, but this is a very acute issue here, of course, housing as a crucial determinant of health. So we're looking at the intersections of the climate crisis and the housing crisis. And when I say the housing crisis, it's not just availability, it's availability, affordability, security, quality, all of it. And also, even as a tenant, if you do have security and you kind of have decent quality, whether you have autonomy over your own environment as well. So it's all of these different layers coming together. And also in this reality where affordable housing in Vancouver or other cities are usually not prepared for a changing climate. So tenants are left with, this awful choice of trading housing for safety, for their own safety and well-being. And the goals of this, so we have two broad goals. We're trying to understand, explore, characterize what the indoor environmental quality is like in these housing units and quantify the relationship between the indoor environmental quality and the impact on their health. So I'll go into methods to talk about exactly how we're doing this. But to set the context, so where are our study sites? So we have one building in Chinatown and one building in Burnaby. Two buildings in Burnaby. The two buildings in Burnaby are BC Housing buildings, and the one in Chinatown is not, but it's like semi-private, semi-subsidized, and mostly for seniors. And we all know, of course, being from here, that Chinatown is a low-income area, and the BC Housing buildings, it is in a mixed income area, but as you know, to qualify for BC Housing, you need to make under a certain threshold, depending on the number of your household, number of people in your household. So what are these buildings like? They are multi-unit residential buildings, high stories. Over half are one-bedroom units. So most people live alone in these units. Yes, and most of them have lived in these buildings for more than 4 years. So they are long-term tenants. And only 34% of all of our participants, I think there are 59 in total, they have a window or a portable AC unit, which you'll see later, it's not even that effective in keeping them cool. And other, comfort enhancing appliances like portable air purifiers, space heaters, they're low in number. 12% reported the presence of mold. So this is actually pretty low, which is good. And what this indicates is that there aren't really issues of ventilation, which is great. But many did indicate some pest issues. And who are our participants? So you'll see that this aligns with the demographic who had the high mortality rates from the heat dome. So most are older, over half are older. We have more female participants than males. 40% white and followed by 37% Asian participants. Majority have high school education at most. And majority fall under the 20,000 income level. And they are mostly retired as they are older. There are more non-smokers, although we almost have an even split of smokers versus non-smokers. And most also have pre-existing other conditions. So whether it's cardiovascular, respiratory, people are on medications. All right. So how are we doing this? So given the, to really understand things in context, we need to approach this from multiple angles. And that's why we have, all of the 4 different routes. Even under each one, I would say there are multiple. I'm gonna really focus on the number 1 component here. But essentially, we have a quantitative component where we have these sensors that we're installing in people's units. Julia's a pro at them. She has installed many of them. And we're also doing surveys to understand their indoor environmental quality in context. I'll talk more about this with the energy and security surveys. And then we have these Fitbits. I am also a guinea pig right now, where we're seeing the health impacts of what the indoor environmental quality is. And then the assessing different interventions. So we're actually just observing things that these buildings are already doing. So both BC Housing and the Chinatown building have been using their multi-purpose room as their in-building cooling room. So a lot of people we know, even though there are city-run cooling spaces, not many people actually access them, whether because they don't want to or because they can't get there. So it's really effective to have something that is really close to them, that is convenient. So we're seeing whether people actually use them and what their experiences are like. And during heat waves, we have also been doing wellness checks, because we, City of Vancouver, for instance, have told us that, it's the social connections that really make a difference. So yeah, we're doing our best. All right, so initial findings. So here's an example of hourly indoor temperature during a heat wave this summer. So the red indicates a 3-day heat wave in July. The red line is a unit without an air conditioner, and the blue line is a unit with one. So even the unit with the AC, the blue line, it hovers around 30 degrees, right? So that's pretty hot, even with an AC. And obviously the one without is much higher. You can also see so every dip is a nighttime temperature. You can see that the nighttime low is not that low. And for instance, in British Columbia, in this region of BC, anything above 26 degrees is considered dangerous. And you can see that every night during the heat wave, it is above 26. So even when it's supposed to be cool, even with an AC, it is not that cool. I'm talking mostly about heat, but I'm using the term indoor environmental quality because we're also looking at air quality. So PM 2.5 is particulate matter. That is 2.5. What is the unit, Amanda? Thank you. Microns wide. So this is, it means that it will infiltrate into your lungs and it is harmful for you. So here again is an example of hourly indoor and outdoor PM 2.5 concentrations. The red is indoors and the blue is outdoors. So you can see a spike around August 7th when we had a brief period of smoke. Thankfully, very fortunately, this summer in BC, we didn't have like a wildfire season, in this region at least. And yeah, so you can see that there's a minimal, you can see that it did go up a little bit. The big spike is actually from, we're guessing it is from cooking. Although from residents who smoke indoors, the spike is kind of constant and yeah, always present. And therein was an interesting issue of ethics, maybe in terms of recruitment, because we initially were going to just exclude people who were smokers, but then we thought, well, this is really not going to convey the reality of people in subsidized housing. So we decided to include them, knowing that our PM 2.5 data was just going to be all off. All right, so how can we understand this data in context? So this is where the Household Energy and Security Survey comes in. So people might have just perfectly fine indoor environmental quality, but that might be because they are foregoing other needs like medical needs or food and other, life essentials. So Household Energy and Security, this is work by Dr. Diana Hernandez, who is my postdoc mentor. And she states that there are 3 pathways, 3 dimensions to energy insecurity, which is economic, first of all. So that's, not being able to pay your bills, for instance. Second, physical. Whoops. So yeah, just, the physical environment of your buildings, whether there are drafts, whether there are holes that make your environment less efficient. And then there are coping strategies that could be dangerous. So like using your oven for heat, for instance, in the winter. So all of these are, of course, impacted by your housing conditions. So here again is a testament to how housing is a crucial determinant of health. So we have these surveys that we're doing to understand everyone's energy insecurity, to understand to understand their indoor environmental quality and context. We don't have results from the EI surveys yet, so I don't have anything to report yet. I'm sorry. But we do have some other results in terms of how participants cope. So I mentioned the in-building cooling rooms. Turns out people actually don't really use them. Although it's actually really, really different. And I think this is where the social cohesion part really comes into play. So the Chinatown building, for instance, people use that room all the time and people actually even sleep there. They are a lot more friendly with each other. There's a real sense of community that we feel when we go to do field work. In BC housing, the sense that we got, and also from survey results, like it is concretely written there, that people don't trust each other. They don't want to interact. There's a real sense of even polarization among the residents themselves. They're worried that they're going to get bed bugs. There are all these other concerns, so they would rather not use them. For those who do, it's usually between 12 p.m. to 6 p.m., usually for about 30 to 60 minutes, so not very long. So it's the purple bits that say, I don't use this room. So we asked why or why not. And so for those who do go, it's because they had a social connection where they could go with a buddy, or by serendipitous, they went to go check the score and it was nice, so they stayed. And then some activities helped where there were exercise classes or something. But for many others, they find it depressing. They think that it is smelly. They don't want to communicate with others. And I will say Julia is also a part of another project where we are exploring why people in general in Metro Vancouver do or do not use cooling centers. And we're seeing a lot of this just repeated in many places. Other reasons, again, for hygiene reasons, they don't feel the need to socialize. Also, people just prefer outdoor air and going to other places like grocery stores or even the doctor's office. So what? All of this, what do we do with all of this? What does this all mean for keeping people marginalized by many axes safe from heat and wildfire smoke? Are air conditioners and better in-building cooling rooms the answer? Maybe temporarily, and for some people perhaps, but not really. Definitely not a sustainable solution. And this is, of course, not to deny people mechanical cooling that they absolutely immediately need. But long-term thinking, this is probably not the best way to go. So some thinking that we have been doing at the Center for Climate Justice with my colleagues, Rafi, Katie, and Jerry, is something called a right to cool. And you have all definitely come across this, even if you don't hear it as right to cool. And we're trying to push this term. So we know essentially there are movements all over Canada and also in the States where the goal is ultimately to keep people cool where they live. And there are many ways to do this. And I think the most prominent right now is the technological innovation piece, where there are maximum indoor temperature thresholds or mechanical cooling, heat pumps. But we know that maximum indoor temperature thresholds, for instance, in Vancouver, is only going to apply to new builds starting in 2025 or 2026. And it's not the people, for example, in this study who are going to be able to afford these new builds. I don't think I could even afford it so that is going to be limited. And then there's also an approach from like a health and well-being perspective, more of a public health approach. And that influences things like, how we think about cooling centers and what we do in designing programs and such. And then this is the part that we're trying to really focus on, because the power relations really come into play here, where tenants in insecure housing who don't have autonomy are not guaranteed a safe environment. So there's also a need to think about this from like a tenants' rights approach. And ultimately, the right to cool lives here at the intersection of all of these. All of this is necessary. We don't want to do away with heat pumps or air conditioning. We're saying that that just can't be the only route that we go, forgetting about the other approaches. So to really hammer the point home, what we don't want is just mere tinkering with the status quo so that only fewer people die. But the fundamental inequities is what we want to address because they persist. And that's things like housing precarity, inequitable access to resources, and also thinking of health as like an individual pursuit or a failure, and not thinking about it in terms of like a structural approach, that there's a responsibility on the state, for instance, to take care of its people, and also a collective and a communal pursuit. So instead, we're asking questions like, how can a right to cool help us advance more justice and a healthier and more equitable communities? And also, how might right to cool advance all three areas of the Venn diagram? And the Venn diagram is continually expanding as we think about this. So yeah, this is the type of thinking that we are trying to pursue. So in closing, I'll say that everything that I just talked about actually forms one piece of a larger project now, funded by the NFRF. So it's this piece that forms, and we're doing this work with a whole bunch of community partners and also international partners. This is being replicated in New York City and Barcelona as well. So maybe in about 4 years' time, I will have new results to report if this goes well. And this could be a whole presentation in itself, but just, you know, doing community engagement work with this type of approach, it's really messy. You know, there's power dynamics between the residents and ourselves, but also among the residents themselves. Even things like, you know, when we thought about whether or not to include smokers as participants, knowing that that data is not going to be that useful, you know, curating data quality versus reflecting reality. What does that look like? And also, this is multilingual. There's cultural layers that we need to consider. So yeah, I think that's a separate presentation in itself. Thank you for your attention. None of this happens without the wonderful work of research assistants, and yeah, and our wonderful partners. So yeah, I'll stop there and I'll take questions. Thank you. Please.
Other health, if you're planning on looking at other health impacts that you feel like this is the impact of importance that might make sense.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I actually didn't even get to the health part. So from the Fitbits, what we're getting is heart rate variability, sleep quality. It also measures things like steps, but we're mostly looking at, yeah, heart rate variability and sleep quality. It's not perfect. There's, you know, a whole field of research just looking at like how important or relevant biometric data is collected from these fitness, wearable fitness trackers. So yeah, those are the two, but we are also doing surveys to understand self-reported health and well-being. So even, you know, things like sleep stress scale. We're doing this every 6 months. So we're getting data from the summer, temperate weather around November, and then also in the winter, so we can look at the difference. So yeah, concrete things like heart rate variability, sleep quality, but also self-reported scales and yeah, sorry, the self-reported scales for stress. Yeah, of course. Yeah, please. Hey. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, oh, sorry. Yes. The question is, what other rights in terms of, you know, not just autonomously having control over your thermostat or AC are we thinking about in terms of tenant rights? Definitely autonomy from the tenant perspective is one. We're also thinking in terms of like what is imposed upon tenants. So Right now, I actually don't know for BC, but in some places, things like installing an air conditioner is considered a capital improvement for these units, which means that landlords can increase rent. So that, I mean, you know, when that doesn't happen for things like smoke alarms, which is like, we wouldn't question a safety measure like a smoke alarm to increase rent, right? So this is why we're working with groups like the Tenant Resource Advisory Center to say actually cooling should be a right now, a basic right that should just be like included in rent and not something that is considered like a supplement or an add-on. So things like that too, that thinking in terms of like what is imposed upon them that should not be there. That's one example. Yeah, thanks, Ray. Yeah, sorry. Hey.
For the and then as much the to explore different functions or ways that we I know like financial aspect of a lot of money spent on creating these spaces and they're not being used.
Mm-hmm. Totally, yeah. And that's a separate project that Julie and I have been working on together. And we've interviewed, not just us two, but there's a whole team. We've interviewed a bunch of people. We've also held a community knowledge exchange to ask exactly those questions like, hey, we know these exist. You don't really like to use them. Like, what else would work for you? And first of all, what came up most prominently was they would like to be cool and comfortable in their own homes, which is totally fair and everyone should have that. But you know, it's like when that is not the immediate reality and people are dying now, like what is the next best solution? I mean, we've gotten some concrete things like using spaces that people already access to be cool. So even if it's like grocery stores, making some seating available there so people can use them because maybe like the community center right near them that is closest to them is actually not that close to them. And if they want to take their kids, you know, it's a whole hassle to take everyone on the bus when they can just go to the next grocery store next to them. That's one. We talked to multilingual participants from different neighborhoods and definitely like cultural barriers was one. Julia, feel free to jump in. Yes. Yeah, nighttime was a huge one. As you saw, like low nighttime temps, they're not very low. So it's like they could be there during the day and then they have to go back to their oven of a room. Also the fact that actually like what we even think of as a cooling center, you know, some are public libraries, some are community centers. So even just like communicating what is a cooling center is important, but also having like a standardized set of operating hours because they might have, yeah, one at one place and like a whole different set of hours and at another. So they like don't know what to expect. And also from the operating perspective, because we also talk to service providers, the cooling centers operate because staff decide to stay longer hours. And that's not always guaranteed, you know, and like some people do it just out of the goodness of their heart. So there's just like more structural support needed too for these public collective good places too. There's a whole plethora. We have like a big, if you actually go on the Center for Climate Justice website, we have a poster that resulted from that workshop where there are concrete suggestions. So yeah, thanks for the question. Yes.
Your pictures that you showed of the site.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Just looking at the picture, one on the left shorter,
So the question is, were there any differences in terms of the like, given the outdoor, immediate outdoor surrounding environment? Right. Yeah. Whether the higher story buildings were hotter. So I'll first say I'm not a building scientist, so anything I say right now is a guess. This is where I need my Health Canada colleagues. Definitely the higher floors were really, really hot for sure. But I I hedge a little bit because I haven't done like a direct comparison with like all other conditions equal, you know, but from just looking at the raw data that we have already, the 19th floor units are really hot. Actually, our like base camp that we work from is also on the 19th floor, and it's like 40 degrees when we enter. There's a thermostat there, and I mean, this is a room also with no blinds or anything. And thankfully, BC Housing, after the heat dome, they installed window film in all the units, but still it's really hot. So I would say absolutely the higher floors are hotter. In terms of the Chinatown building, they have a courtyard in the middle, which maybe mitigates things, and it has some trees, but still the units that face west, so they get a lot of afternoon and evening sun, are really hot compared to the rest. So I would actually say there's more difference like within each building in terms of like the cardinal direction they face and the story that they're on. Yeah, but like I would love to know the relationship, yeah, between like tree canopy like immediately next door versus. Completely, totally. Yeah, and this is one of the reasons that BC Housing was interested in partnering on this project. So yeah, and urban planning, I mean, yeah, it fascinates me. I'd love to know more too. Thank you. Yeah, just. Mm-hmm.
I was trying to understand, so there's a question of which design you choose, but if like if there are similar rooms in space and terminal and ready to for okay, building, is it a question of which design you choose or which technology you use to design these rooms? There was some comments about the smell, for example,
Yeah.
could be maybe needed versus, and I didn't start answering that question. Is it a question of not, on the contrary, of playing the same design everywhere and not paying attention to how the people interact?
Right. Okay. Exactly. Yeah. So the question was, in terms of multi-purpose rooms that are used as cooling spaces in buildings, like what is more effective essentially, like standardizing the design and like making it better, or does the problem lie elsewhere in terms of people using it? Is that correct? Okay. So you're going to get a sociologist answer to this because that's how I think about it. But I think it resonates, I think, given our interactions with participants. I think you can have the best room in the world, but if you don't trust your neighbors, you're not going to go because you don't want to interact with them. So I think this is where actually the entire building design comes into play, perhaps. Like if we had a building, and also honestly, like the social political context where we wanted to interact with people and were less isolated, if we had a building design where there were like more walkways and more, design that is conducive to interactions and community fostering, then I think from that comes trust and more likelihood for people to access these communal spaces without fear of like literally running into your neighbor. That is a fear that some people have. So that's my take. Of course, I think building design probably really plays a role. Yeah, that's my take. Yes.
I have a question also about the multi-purpose rooms. I'm just wondering, and maybe this was on the graphs, but I'm wondering like how much cooler the multi-purpose rooms were compared to the
Totally. The multi-purpose rooms, how much were the multi-purpose rooms cooler than the individual units? So yeah, each multi-purpose room has an air conditioner. In BC Housing, for instance, it was always below 25. Honestly, it's cold to go in there when we're doing field work. To go from like the 40-degree room lounge that we work in to the 20, it's cold. In Golden Age Court, I say the difference is, sorry, the Chinatown building, the difference is not that big. Yeah, but it's significantly cooler. And yet people don't use them. I think I saw a hand. Yes, David, yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. It's so fascinating.
Thank you.
It was interesting that the right to cool is at the heart of your kind of solutions metric at the end there. It reminded me of Sheila Watt-Luce, the Inuit leader who talks about the right to cool.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But it also made me think, didn't mention the right to housing.
Yeah.
And Canada actually just passed a law 4 years ago the second time.
Yes. In 2019, yeah.
Yeah, federal housing advocate, and I thought maybe some of these results should be communicated.
Right, yes. yes. So the comment more so is that this should be communicated to the federal, what are they called? Housing advocate, yeah.
Rather than the right
Hmm.
housing, which is recognized, brings in a full human rights-based approach.
Hmm.
And I just wondered if you considered all the multiple potential benefits of that from education,
Right. I actually really appreciate you labeling it like that. So at the CCJ, we absolutely we totally are factoring in the right to housing things, but the components that you just broke it down to, that's really helpful. We absolutely will consider those. And yeah, this is ongoing work. So any feedback like that is really helpful. Thank you. I'm glad this is recorded because I don't remember what you just said. So yes. Mhm.
Super high mortality rate.
Yeah.
Like, cow, arthritis, things like this.
Yeah.
Were to the left of this.
Mhm.
What are the characteristics of people with dementia that make them less likely?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. So the question is, what's the reason why people with dementia, for instance, have died at lower rates? So BCCDC, the BC Center for Disease Control, has actually done work around this, and this is also their guess, but they are saying that people with dementia are precisely the kind of group that we are more likely to check in upon. So if you have aging parents who have dementia, you are more likely to call them and see if they are okay, rather than people with schizophrenia, for instance. This is a guess from the BCCDC, but I think that really makes sense, especially given how important the social connections and check-ins are. So, you know, to the extent, like Vancouver Coastal Health they still do cooling kits, and they used to ask, what is in your cooling kit? You know, ice packs, water, whatnot. But now they are saying, who is in your cooling kit? Because they really recognize how important this social cohesion piece is. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
Like everybody, I'm still struggling with the sort of fear of running into your neighbor's home.
Yeah.
So there's another building outside their primary building, so it couldn't be school, but they're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Online for schooling. So, you know, if you're pretty running into your neighborhood, you have a few options.
The question is, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, are there examples of other places where there's like a 24/7 cooling space so people or can come online? Right. Yeah, like on like an ad hoc basis so people have options. Right. I don't know of any place like that. But I wonder if the same problems might still exist. Like if the fear of running into your neighbor, it just, yeah, you know, this is, or even just like, it's just like you don't want to interact with strangers at all. And also, I think that also gets rid of the benefit of the in-building cooling because they didn't want to leave their building in the first place. So I don't know that they want to leave. Just a guess, I am not sure. Yeah.
They were looking for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's too hot for them, you know, the first version of this.
Right. The question is, so things like checking for like physiological symptoms of heat stroke or dehydration. Do people understand the need to hydrate? Yeah. Right. So less in this project, we're asking questions like that, but in the schizophrenia project, for instance, you know, our conversations get to whether they were aware of like what they need to do. And I would say, Carson and Lucy, you can jump into, people usually know what to do and like what to look for. they don't always have the resources to do so. That said, we were also careful not to frame the question as if, if they suffered from it, that it was their fault. Because I think this again replicates the problem that, of course, health is and should be everyone's responsibility to a certain extent, but not solely. So yeah, I think that like the information deficit approach education approach is valid, has merit. But at least in the project that I'm pursuing, I'm trying to put more emphasis on the structural piece. But it's not to say that that's not helpful. But for this, we have not asked that. Yes.
The group that, like the graph that was like the cooling room.
Yeah, this is from the 3. So is this graph from just the participants of this project? Yes. Right. So your question is now about the other project that we're on about cooling centers, which is totally good. Yeah. What were their reasons and like where are they going? Is that your question? Right. From that, we have found that people usually go to public libraries, community centers, grocery stores, doctors' offices. In Chinatown, they are going to like their hub where they play mahjong and other games. Like it's all places that they already go to. They're not changing their life around heat. They don't want to. They want to keep living their lives, but it's really helpful when those places are already cool. Yeah. Yeah, just.
How much people, and I think about this because we think about there's other group that we think there's like necessary coding, but there's and it seems to me that the discussion is more about the necessary part. Okay, that's why I wonder about the pricing model, because the pricing is such that the subsidization of the offer of the right to be able to put from that part to the
Right. Yeah. So I don't know how to concisely rephrase that question. Is the right to cool thinking about the pricing models of this between cooling that is absolutely necessary versus cooling that is supplemental ish. I will say we have not gotten that far. We're like far from, and none of us actually at the CCJ are economists. I don't know that we have the chops to do that type of analysis, but again, that is really helpful feedback for us to think about. So also glad that this is recorded, so I have it on record. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that question. Yes.
And how discomfort might be related to threat perception.
Interesting, yeah.
And so like this project clean and cool air, but like the clean part, maybe people don't understand as much as the cool part, maybe they don't feel it. Or maybe they do, but differently. This is not like a comment question.
No, yeah, totally helpful. Yeah, so the question is observation that people use the cooling room less on wildfire days than on normal days. And does that say something about threat perception between heat and wildfire smoke? I don't know because we didn't ask. But even maybe because there has been so much communication around the heat dome and how many people die, but less so around wildfire smoke. And when we hear about death tolls from wildfire smoke, it's like usually people who are like in the vicinity rather than people, I actually don't know this, but epidemiologists would have data on like how many people die from heat versus air quality. Amanda actually might know this. I won't put you on the spot. So yeah, I don't have an answer, but I think that's a really interesting thing to pursue. Threat perception, I think, is huge. And I mean, even heat itself, because it is invisible, I think there's a lot of work to be done. Even, when we look at media and media's reporting on heat waves, they're showing videos and pictures of like beaches and people at like water parks, not ambulances and gurneys. I think it's slowly changing, but yeah.
Question. Do you think that showing pictures in the media of pools is a wrong approach? Like, do you think that would this be more better if we saw ambulances? Or would
Totally, yeah.
everybody, like panic and
Yeah. So question is, would it be better if media used more alarming photos like gurneys and ambulances? I think so personally. That said, of course, you're right that there is also a balance to strike between like causing mayhem and panic. But totally. I don't know that it would ever get to that level, especially because, especially in Canada, in a generally cold climate, people are really excited about the heat. So I think going a little more on the alarming side wouldn't hurt, but that's, again, just me.
Yeah, another comment that remembering a heat wave that happened. So there were a lot of deaths in Quebec, Montreal, but not Toronto, and then the explanation became people went and knocked on doors.
Interesting. Okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
I don't know what literature, but it's
Good to know. Yeah. So I think similar with the 1995 Chicago heat wave too, social connections really mattered. Yes, of course. Mm-hmm.
And I was working remotely, so I wasn't in contact with many people, and then I got the community that I might have cooling, also got COVID and stuff, so I also not going to go there.
Yeah.
And I think you said your study was.
No, this is all happening last year and now. That's okay.
Yeah, but what do you, one side like yourself, and you also wanted to.
Totally, yeah. So yeah, question is how do you navigate compounding impacts of things like COVID and public safety, and how someone again perceives threat in terms of like their thermal comfort, and then there's their risk to getting COVID, for instance. That absolutely came up in our interviews. A lot of people did avoid public spaces, especially during the peak of COVID, because they didn't want to get COVID. But even outside of that, they, yeah, they're like, people cough around me, I don't like it. Totally, absolutely. And I think that's, again, where the right to cooling comes in, where people should be able to be comfortable where they live, and also have access to public spaces. But I think ultimately the answer is like people should have the luxury of the choice rather than the choices. I either go and get COVID at a public cooling center or I bake in my room. Yeah. Should I start? I think there was one more hand or. Okay. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. These are really helpful questions.